Tim Montemayor. Tim, I see you right there. Look at Tim. If you're watching on the YouTube chat, you can see Tim joining us right now, host of the Monty Show. We're talking Pac-12, Big 12, Colorado on the move. Tim, thanks for jumping on. You're on with Drapes and Jay. Let's start with this Colorado news, my man. Shocked at all by this? Had you heard rumblings that this might be happening?
Yeah, I'm not shocked at all. First of all, to be on with the illustrious Jay Johnson, the greatest undersized second baseman with them hands is amazing. But the point is,
you already start. Yeah. Okay.
But the point is, no, not surprised at all. When you look at Colorado, we've been hearing about this for months and months. You knew after the meeting, I don't know how many people knew this, but there was a meeting last Thursday where Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff was supposed to lay out the proposed TV deal and give them numbers. That meeting went horribly sideways, mainly because our sources told us that George didn't have numbers or a concrete path forward. And there was an odd calm on the call. And when Colorado got off that call, that's when they were all sitting in a room and they said, this is it, we're done. We have to protect ourselves. And notice the statement they made today where they talked about the fact that, hey, we like the 3 time zones in the Big 12. We like the linear TV deal. Because we've been hearing for months and months that the Pac-12 was never going to get a grant of rights on a deal that was more than 50% streaming. So that clearly was a thing with a lot of people in the Pac-12. With all due respect, they're a bunch of old heads, man. They don't stream. They don't want to flip around channels to try and find their favorite game. So no, this is not surprising at all.
Monty, and the reason I wanted to have you on is you've been all over this, man. It seems like for the last couple of years, and you had a lot of time, of course, being out here on the West Coast, and you're pretty close to us. We don't consider you the West Coast because you're not in California, but at the same time, you're on the West Coast. With that being said, as someone who grew up here, what if the Pac-12 goes bye-bye, what really happens in your mind? Like where does Stanford, Cal, the Washington schools, Arizona's where you're close to, where do they go?
I would tell you that tonight, Oregon and Washington are going to have calls with the Big 12, Brett Yormark and his team at the Big 12. It is a little surprising that the Big 10 has not acted here. And you would think with as loose as people's lips are that you would have heard something about that by now. But I have not heard word one about the Big 10 getting involved in this. The other thing I would say is I think if you're Arizona State, you're in a really precarious situation because you are nothing when it comes to sports. Their athletic director is a gentleman named Ray Anderson, who went on the biggest Arizona State podcast and said, yeah, we're a top 15 team, but that's about our ceiling. Wow. That doesn't right? I mean, that doesn't excite people. We want to hear about the Beam team winning the Western Conference, right? We want championships. And when you say stuff like that, I think you're in trouble. I think the team that's in real trouble here is Washington State, because Washington State is in a very bad spot financially. They are in a hole. They're much like Cal. Cal's getting millions of dollars in a subsidy starting next year from UCLA, who went to the Big 10. Washington State doesn't have that bailout. So I think Oregon State and Washington State are in a tough spot. I think there's a real good chance that 4 more teams, really 3 more teams plus 2, could end up in the Big 12. But I think the only real logical place for the Pac-12 to end up is in a merger with the Mountain West, because that's the only place that this ends up. Because you guys, the Pac-12 as we know it is dead. It's over.
Wow.
They're going back.
Tim, this reminds me of what happened to the Big East a few years ago. Once, a couple of the big names started to leave, it was a race to jump ship. You didn't want to be but you mentioned it. Schools like Arizona State, Washington State, Oregon State, they don't have anywhere to go. They're the Big 12 or the Big 10, they're not calling for those schools. And so as a Pac-12 fan, where did it go wrong? What happened? Where did it go wrong, and how could it have been saved? What decision or lack thereof led to this?
This is one of the most shocking, unnecessary collapses in the history of professional sports. Because 12 years ago, when this conference was put into the shape that it's in now, it was a juggernaut. It was a Big 10. It was an SEC. It was the biggest of the big. But you just had consistent mismanagement right? And George Kliavkoff is as responsible as the former commissioner, Larry Scott. Now, Larry Scott made the fatal flaw of not wanting to get in bed with DirecTV and later Google. But George Kliavkoff was brought in and immediately got a president's call together about 18 months ago now with Carol Folt, the president at USC. And it was 4 presidents, and they said, hey, should we expand the conference with Oklahoma State and several other Big 12 teams? Carol Folt at USC said no, hung up the phone, and essentially turned around, signed a contract, and faxed it back to the Big 10. And nobody knew. And we just saw the same thing happen with Colorado. Nobody thought Colorado was doing this the last 3 days. Nobody knew. How is it possible that your most important member in USC and Prime, Coach Prime, was only brought to this conference? Remember what they said, ratings and recruiting. Well, nobody knew that was going to be in the Big 12, right? Like it's pure incompetence. You haven't kept in touch. You haven't made relationships. You've talked this big game, and it never had to happen. This should have been the greatest athletic conference in the existence of college athletics. The Conference of Champions. Bill Walton will never shut up saying that. God bless him, because I do think he's dead, but he's still alive. But my point is, the Conference of Champions should have been the ultimate championship, and it didn't happen because they ran it into the ground. That's why.
Wow. Joined by Tim Montemayor, host of the Monty Show. Was there any, I mean, I don't want to say any because there was, but what was the significance of a TV deal last week that we, of course, didn't hear from the Pac-12? Was there anything legitimate on the table, or was there not? And that's the reason why we didn't see anything come to fruition.
There was not. And it's really interesting. If you go back, there's a guy named Kirk Schultz, who is the president of Washington State University, but he's also the chairman of the Pac-12 Board of Directors. And there's 3 people on the board of directors, and they have pods of other presidents in the conference, and they push down to those pods. Kirk Schultz has repeatedly said, hey, it's coming. It's going to happen. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be better. We're going to be kicking ass. Heather Dinich at ESPN, who I worked with, she's a phenomenal journalist. But what did she say last week? Hey, it's coming. It's going to be phenomenal. It's going to kick ass. She was talking to Kurt Schultz, and Kurt Schultz has never been right, not one time. So you go back to that meeting last Thursday, mind you, the day before Pac-12 football media day, and George Kliavkoff didn't have numbers. He didn't have a deal to present. And most of all, he didn't have a path forward, because there is no path forward, because he doesn't understand the most important equation in life, really, and in sports. Understand who you are and where you are and what your value proposition is. And he didn't understand any of that. And with all due respect to Heather Dinich at ESPN, she got duped by Kirk Schultz, who's never been right about anything in his entire life. And it's shocking. Again, I don't mean to be redundant. It's shocking we are even having this conversation today.
Wow. Unbelievable. So with the Pac-12, and correct me if I'm wrong, does it still have the relationship with the Rose Bowl, and what happens to the Rose Bowl going forward?
Well, yeah, it has a relationship with the Rose Bowl, but the Rose Bowl is going to be folded in. The Rose Bowl just signed a new deal with the college football playoff, and they're looking to have that game be of significance. I mean, Utah and Ohio State played a game that really essentially meant nothing last year, if we're being honest. And the real question is, yeah, the Rose Bowl is still going to be significant, but who's going to have the affiliation? It's probably just going to be the college football playoff tie-in. But if the real question is, let's say that the Pac-12 exists, they lose 4 members, but they add San Diego State and they add SMU, who says they have all this money and we're going to come in and spend money and win the Pac-12, even though we have all this money now and we haven't won the AAC, which makes no sense at all. But let's say they exist there. The problem is, who's going to watch that conference? If you're Jimmy Bob on the East Coast, and it's midnight and you're trying to pay attention to Oregon State and SMU, your eyes are going to be much heavier and you're going to sleep. Because you're not paying attention to that game. So nobody's going to care. You're not going to be relevant. And the biggest issue is, you're going to be an 8-team conference that's not a Power 5 league. So you're not going to get into the college football playoff, because the other part, not to get too detailed, but the other part is the tie-ins for the college football playoff. Right now, the top 6 ranked conference champions. So if you're a conference champion and you're ranked in the top 6 in college football, you're in the college football playoff. But who's going to vote for Oregon State or Washington State?
Right.
Nobody's going to do that. This is ultimately what happened to Chris Peterson and why he left Boise and went to Oregon or went to Washington. He wanted to play games of consequence. So that's ultimately what happened. The Rose Bowl is going to be fine, even though, can we stop talking about how great that stadium is? Because it's impossible to get to. It's a dump. And it's hard to get to. It's even harder to get out of it. You can't get an Uber and you can't make a phone call.
Sound like you have some personal experience.
I know. I'm a fan of Pasadena, though. I like Pasadena. I mean, the city. I like the city. You know, it's really nice. But I hear you.
Rocking with my guy Tim Montemayor, host of the Monty Show. Man, one thing I've always learned from you. You told me this very early in this game. You're worth what a person would pay you. Yes. With that being said, you said this was San Diego State, and that's where I wanted to go. What happened? How did they drop the bag? And it looked like it was a shoo-in for San Diego State to be the next school when the Pac-12. And then secondly, I know it's a lot of bad news. Give me something good to at least move forward for the Pac-12. Give me a surprise school who might be, a target for the Pac-12.
San Diego State forgot that equation. You're worth what somebody's willing to pay. They got over their skis. Their athletic director is a guy named J.D. Wicker. He put a plant, essentially. He put a bug with Seth Davis at The Athletic in a quote about Snapdragon Stadium, their new football stadium. And he said, I don't know where we're going to be. It'll be the Big 12 or the Pac-12, but we're going to be somewhere else. And then Adela Della Torre, the president of San Diego State, in an interview said, the Pac-12 will get us the pro rata we deserve, fully not understanding that pro ratas are not a thing. It happened in one contract in television. They went to the Pac-12 School of Management and believed that everybody wanted them. And then when they told the Mountain West were leaving, the Mountain West said, okay, great. We're going to take your $17 million. And San Diego State said, but wait, we need to make installments. Can we put that on layaway? And they said, no, Kmart's out of business, dude. We want our $7 million, and we're going to hold on to the $6 million we've already got for you that we were supposed to pay you. Oh, by the way, you also, because the other thing that they said is we need a 30-day extension to wait for the Pac-12.
Right.
Who's doing that, and for what reason?
Right.
I think San Diego State is going to, if the Pac-12 survives, San Diego State will be there. But one team I'd really pay attention to is Tulane in the Pac-12 because they're really good academically. Really, really good. They have on-campus facilities. Their fan base is great. Teal is a beautiful color, right? But
dude, that's a far drive. That's a far ride in the plane, though, man.
But you don't get to do what you want to do anymore. You're doing what you have to. So the drive is what it is, right? I just think Tulane's one of those teams, but I'd watch SMU because they've got pockets. I'd probably pay attention.
Dallas too.
I just think, dude, the problem is they don't deliver Dallas, though, Jay. Dallas belongs to the Pac-12.
Pac-12.
And I think when you look at Lubbock in Texas Tech, UT, certainly, TCU, like that's the heart of the Big 12 is in Dallas. SMU delivers you money. It's a money grab, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just because it says Dallas on the front of their uniform doesn't mean they deliver Dallas.
Tim,
it's interesting. Man.
Yeah, before I let you go quickly, is golf a sport?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim Montemayor. Thanks so much, man. Thanks for jumping on this show.
Golf ain't no sport, man.